That evening, Brenda wore paisley shorts and black socks. "I write poetry," she announced. They were at her place, a modest hotel near the Great Lift. "Oh," said Profane. "I am the 20th century," she read. Profane rolled away and stared at the pattern in the rug. "I am the ragtime and the tango, sans serif, clean geometry. I am the virgin's hair whip and the cunningly detailed shackles of decadent passion. I am every lonely railway station in every capital of Europe. I am the street, the fanciless buildings of government, the café dansant, the clockwork figure, the jazz saxophone, the tourist lady's hairpiece, the fairy's rubber breasts, the travelling clock which always tells the wrong time and chimes in different keys. I am the dead palm tree, the negroes dancing pumps, the dried fountain after tourist season. I am all the appurtenances of night." "That sounds about right," said Profane. "I don't know." She made a paper aeroplane out of the poem and sailed it across the room on strata of her own exhaled smoke. "It's a phony college girl poem, things I've read for courses. Does it sound right?" "Yes." "You've done so much more. Boys do." "What?" You've had all these fabulous experiences. I wish mine would show me something." "Why?" The experience. Haven't you learned?" Profane didn't have to think long. "No," he said. "Offhand, I'd say I haven't learned a goddamn thing." Hello, welcome to Red Read. That was me Red reading from V, the debut novel by Thomas Pynchon, which I ended up loving a lot. Even though I always say this, I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard that some Pynchon is not as great as others. Everything I read is just reaffirming that he has knocked Nabokov off the list as my, off the kind of number one place as my favorite author. And although Nabokov is still pretty happily snug down at number 2 or 3, but yeah, because I know that yes, I've read Gravity's Rainbow and I've read Lot 49, and I'm kind of, after those, I've almost been working through the not as strong Pynchon books, but I'm still just thoroughly enjoying all of them, which is great because now I only have Bleeding Edge, which is the next one I'll read, and then I have Mason and Dixon and Against the Day, and I can't decide which of the two I want to read last, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But yeah, because even though there are some Pynchon light novels, like Inherent Vice and Vineland, which are really just character-focused novels, not really Pynchon light. There are I even reading Slow Learner, which is funny because one of the stories in Slow Learner gets reworked in V, but I'll get to that. Reading Slow Learner and V has just kind of affirmed that I just love everything that this man writes, and I'm always just going to come here and just rave about it and just say how much I love it. I know I've been rambling because this book is also a bit of a ramble, but in a really good way. I'm going to just try and say a bunch of important character names right now and what they're doing and what they're looking for, so that I don't have to come back to it and don't have to worry about missing out on stuff. But basically, starting with V, V is a mysterious entity that kind of shows up and is around very MacGuffinly, and I'll actually talk about MacGuffins in a little bit. But V is an entity, probably a woman, that a man named Stencil is looking for. The Stencil that we know and we're familiar with is Herbert Stencil, who is in the present day, or 1956 of the novel, and he's funny. You can kind of always spot him because he's, aside from his name, he always talks in the third person. But then there are other Stencils. There's Stencil's father, and so in other chapters of the book, it alternates between different time zones, but aside from the chapters that jump to different historical periods, really every other chapter is centered around Benny Profane. He's our kind of main character, really. He's a Schliemel, which is like a klutz, and it's kind of funny. There's a lot of yo-yo imagery of him like bouncing around, and I'll get to that as well. But yeah, he's and so there's Benny Profane, an ex-Navy officer, and his sort of interaction with the whole sick crew, where you find people like Esther and Rachel and so on, artists and people who are just trying to make it and survive in the sort of mid-50s and going into the 60s. The story doesn't really have a plot because it is like true archetypal MacGuffin. Yes, your kind of V is an abstract concept, which is actually literally said in the story. By this point, V had become somewhat of an abstract concept, but of course the MacGuffin is used as a vessel to sort of teach you about the characters and hopefully get you interested in the world, and so on. I wouldn't say, like, I still have not read a story that has as strong a MacGuffin as Infinite Jest, but it is much more in that line. And my small rant on MacGuffins is just that I feel like people, like, yes, MacGuffins are kind of like a non-object, a sort of miscellaneous thing that the main characters want, but I feel like it's not really fair to say that things like Infinity Stones or Tesseracts from the Marvel universe are MacGuffins, because as far as I'm aware and from what I've seen, you know, they actually have a purpose. You do literally, like, the characters actually literally want them. And yes, you learn about motives and stuff, but they aren't abstract concepts. They couldn't be replaced with anything else. And so, like, they're just actually literally key story points. The people actually need these things. As opposed to something like V, where V never becomes a really clear, like, this is V. You don't really ever get the satisfaction of a character holding Infinite Jest, the videotape, and really there's also similarities with the Quintuple Zero rocket, the V2A4 rocket from Gravity's Rainbow, but yeah, this is much more of a sort of archetypal or prototypical MacGuffin story, and so in that sense it doesn't have a really strong story. You will, as always with Pynchon, you will need to kind of be content with not getting a satisfying resolution at the end, but really it's, you know, this is the lamest thing to say ever, but it is about the journey and just about learning about the characters. My general impression of the story, or of my general reading experience, was just that it was kind of ups and downs, almost yo-yo-esque or V-like, but really after I hit chapter 11, The Confessions of Fausto Magistral, the book just instantly clicked. That chapter was perfect and every single word was incredible in that chapter. It's sort of the Confessions, it's a letter from Fausto Magistral to his daughter, who is later revealed to be a character from the whole Sick Crew. And just the whole rest of the book was great. It starts to converge, you know, the two storylines converge in a, you know, or imagine they converge that way. But anyway, yeah, and so from that point, about, you know, 300-ish, with about 150 pages left, the whole book, the rest of the book was just completely solid, and I loved it so much, which I guess really would make it more like a Y, right? But anyway. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say, other than that, or anything else that I want to say is going to kind of pop up as I now proceed to just go through some of my notes and read some extracts that I really like. So in this section, Benny Profane and Rachel Hourglass had been drinking, and Benny has gotten really drunk, and he decides to go and try to piss on the sun to put it out. He got out of the car, wandered off behind a tree, and pointed west, with some intention of pissing on the sun to put it out for good and all, this being somehow important to him. Inanimate objects could do what they wanted. Not what they wanted because things do not want, only men, but things do what they do, and this is why Profane was pissing at the sun. And so, even though, like, just coming out of the gate as with his debut novel, you are still getting a very clear Pynchon style, and that's what I love so much, and it's so admirable, not to mention the fact that he wrote this book when he was my age, or 26. So I'm glad I got to this early on, because Pynchon tells a story about the boy who was born with a golden screw in his navel, and then, you know, blah blah blah, joke, punchline, eventually goes to a shaman, has a dream, unscrews the nail, and the boy's ass falls off. And so that's the joke, and the first time I ever heard that joke was in Patrick Rothfuss's The Wise Man's Fear, which was written in 2011, and I just thought it was funny and moved on. But then if you feel so inclined, go onto my Instagram, because I did a little reel where I was trying to dive and find different occurrences or times that the joke showed up, because I read it again here, and I eventually went all the way back and found a oblique reference to it in Moby Dick, 1851, which is kind of cool. And everyone's always like, oh yeah, I guess the joke's as old as screws, but how old are screws? Like, the first patent for a screw was like 1730 or something, which is only 120 years before Moby Dick. And it's like, obviously nails have existed since, well, I guess, like, you know, Jesus. But yeah, like when was the first screw invented and a screwdriver? Okay, here we get some really classic Pynchon sentences that, and it's kind of funny to say classic because this is like the first story, but again, just reiterating this idea of Pynchon having a really, really clear style right out of the gate. Rachel was looking into the mirror at an angle of 45 degrees, and so had a view of the face turned toward the room and the face on the other side, reflected in the mirror. Here were time and reverse time, coexisting, cancelling one another exactly out. Were there many such reference points scattered through the world? Perhaps only at nodes like this room, which housed a transient population of the imperfect, the dissatisfied? Did real time plus virtual or mirror time equal zero and thus serve some half-understood moral purpose? Or was it only the mirror world that counted? Only a promise of a kind that the inward bow of a nose bridge or a promontory of extra cartilage at the chin meant a reversal of ill fortune, such that the world of the altered would thenceforth run on mirror time, work and love by mirror light, and be only, till death stopped the heart's ticking, metronome's music, quietly as light ceases to vibrate and imps dance under the century's own chandeliers. What a sentence, man. The 46th page of the first thing he wrote. Jeez. And here is him physically describing Rachel Hourglass. You felt she'd done 1,000 secret things to her eyes. They needed no haze of cigarette smoke to look at you out of, sexy and fathomless, but carried their own along with them. New York must have been for her a city of smoke, its streets the courtyards of limbo, its bodies like wraiths. Smoke seemed to be in her voice, in her movements, making her all the more substantial, more there, as if words, glances, small lewdnesses could only become baffled and brought to rest like smoke in her long hair, remain there useless till she released them, accidentally and unknowingly, with a toss of her head. Okay, so here's a section where Esther is a member from the whole sick crew, is going to Schoenmaker, or the beauty maker, I guess, and she's asking him she's asking for a nose job. And he asks her, what sort of nose did you have in mind? What else? Irish, she wanted, turned up, like they all wanted. To none of them did it occur that this retrosé nose, too, is an aesthetic misfit. A Jew nose in reverse is all. Few had ever asked for a so-called perfect nose, where the roof is straight, the tip untilted and unhooked, the columella separating the nostrils meeting at the upper lip at 90 degrees, all of which went to support his private thesis that correction, along all dimensions, social, political, emotional, entails retreat to a diametric opposite rather than any reasonable search for a golden mean. A little bit on the nose, but, you know. So we even get some classic Pynchon writing lyrics and writing songs. He's obviously very influenced by jazz music. McClintock Sphere, who's a mainish character in this, is a jazz saxophonist and alto. But I'm going to read a kind of dark humor, like a black humor sort of nihilism song that he wrote. Last night I went and raced with the highway patrol, but that Pontiac done had more guts than mine, and so I wrapped my tail round a telephone pole, and now my baby, she just sits a-crying. I'm up in heaven, darling, now don't you cry, ain't no reason why you should be blue. Just go out and race a cop in Daddy's old Ford, and you can join me up in heaven too. Okay, here's a sort of long-ish sentence or structure where Pynchon is talking about Benny Profane, who's describing his relationship with alligators, because before he kind of loses the job, Profane was hired to go down into the sewers basically with a shotgun and hunt for alligators. It occurred to him that somewhere, when he was drunk, too horny to think straight, tired, he'd signed a contract above the paw prints of what were now alligator ghosts, almost as if there had been this agreement, a covenant, Profane giving death, the alligators giving him employment, tit for tat. He needed them, and if they needed him at all, it was because in some prehistoric circuit of the alligator brain, they knew that as babies, they'd been only another consumer product, along with the wallets and pocketbooks of what might have been parents or kin, and all the junk of the world's Macy's. And the soul's passage down the toilet and into the underworld was only a temporary peace intention, borrowed time till they would have to return to being falsely animated kids' toys. Of course they wouldn't like it, would want to go back to what they'd been, and the most perfect shape of what was dead, what else, to be gnawed into exquisite rococo by rat artisans, eroded to an antique bone finish by the holy water of the parish, tinted to phosphorescence by whatever had made that alligator's sepulchre so bright that night. Kind of commenting on the times, I guess, you know. On the way downtown on the subway, he decided that we suffer from great temporal homesickness for the decade we were born in. Because he felt now as if he were living in some private depression days, the suit, the job with the city that would not exist after 2 weeks more at the most. All around him were people in new suits, millions of inanimate objects being produced brand new every week, new cars in the streets, houses going up by the thousands all over the suburbs he had left months ago. Where was the depression? In the sphere of Benny Profane's guts and in the sphere of his skull, concealed optimistically by a tight blue serge coat and a Schlemel's hopeful face. So Schlemel, if I didn't mention, is sort of like a klutz. Okay, so as I mentioned a bit earlier, the concept of a yo-yo comes in, this sort of going up and down, this I guess links everybody with the whole sick crew. This sort of sentiment that was coming out of being in, like, yes, the book is set in the 50s, but Pynchon is writing this in the 60s. There is start of this, the emergence of this counterculture, and these people who are, they're feeling like, even though they have these ideas, they're not necessarily able to execute on them, and they're still stuck within the system. And I'm just gonna read a section of Benny talking about feeling like a yo-yo himself. Strangely then, the tumescence began to subside, the flesh at his neck to pale. Any sovereign or broken yo-yo must feel like this after a short time of lying inert, rolling, falling, suddenly to have its own umbilical string reconnected, and know the other end is in hands it cannot escape, hands it doesn't want to escape. Know that the simple clockwork of itself has no need for symptoms of inutility, lonesomeness, directionlessness, because now it has a path marked out for it over which it has no control. That's what the feeling would be if there were such things as animate yo-yos. Pending any such warp in the world, Profane felt like the closest thing to one, and above her eyes began to doubt his own animateness. Also, another thing that I kind of want to mention is that, Pynchon being kind of pretty forward-thinking and really quite progressive beforehand, considering the time, of course, there's Oedipa Maas being like a main character of a housewife who goes on this great detective story in Crying of Lot 49. But we have, an idea that still kind of blows my mind is remembering that interracial marriage was only legalized in America in 1967, and in this story, Pynchon is writing about McClintock Sphere, a white musician, kind of getting into a secret relationship with an African American prostitute, basically, who's kind of ended up being, spoiler alert, it ends up being discovered that she's actually Maltese, and she's sort of kind of like presenting as being dark, but I guess the sentiment is still there that Pynchon is kind of willing to explore these ideas, which, he becomes no stranger to exploring sort of fringe ideas. Okay, this is from my favorite chapter in the book, The Confessions of Fausto Magistral. Truth, in the sense of attainable accuracy, no metaphysics. Poetry is not communication with angels or with the subconscious. It is communication with the guts, genitals, and 5 portals of sense, nothing more. I know of machines that are more complex than people. If this is apostasy, hek ikun, which I think, if I remember correctly, is Maltese for so be it, or, God willing or something. To have humanism, we must first be convinced of our humanity. As we move further into decadence, this becomes more difficult. There is another interesting thing. So one of the big parts of this book is that there is a chapter about Kurt Mondaugen, who ends up becoming a character in Gravity's Rainbow. And very importantly, in Gravity's Rainbow, a key plot point is that there is the Schwarzkommando, who are these people, this kind of military unit almost from the Herero people, who are kind of fighting back against the Germans. And one of the reasons why I maybe recommend reading V is because there is actually a very long section that is explicitly talking about the sort of genocide of the Herero people, and it can be really hard to read, but it was also good to kind of go back and read it after having read Gravity's Rainbow, because I got a lot of sort of cultural backstory, but still written in the universe in which Pynchon is writing, and written in his prose style, as opposed to just going and researching, you know, the Herero people. So yeah, that was a great thing. So another big theme about the that comes into play with the whole sick crew is just this idea of, again, feeling lost. And Rachel says, once I will say it is all, that crew does not live, it experiences. It does not create, it talks about people who do. Varese, Ionesco, de Kooning, Wittgenstein, I could puke. It satirizes itself and doesn't mean it. Time magazine takes it seriously and does mean it. And so, yeah, it's this kind of getting into points about this idea of needing to move on and being this sort of generation that's post the boomers, and so they are a little bit, you know, I guess they're technically the baby boomers, considering the age that they would be, but thinking about the generation that follows, this idea of the counterculture and not really wanting to grow up. I think it's kind of epitomized in that whole sick crew. And the one lucky last thing that I will read is, of course, the quote from McClintock Sphere, who says, "Keep cool, but care." And yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say about all I wanted to say and all I wanted to read from Pynchon's V. I am very hyped to go and read Bleeding Edge next, and I will definitely try, and I don't know if I'll get to Against the Day this year, but Mason and Dixon definitely. That is on the TBR. Let me know what you thought of V. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Let me know if you didn't, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.